Hello, everyone. It is 1:30 Eastern Time, and I want to welcome you to Create Great Business Videos. This is a series of live webcasts that will show you everything you need to know about how to create videos that attract clients and customers to your business. We want to create a series that's filled with insightful content, is interactive, and is most of all respectful of your time. So our programs will typically be half an hour, and that will include time at the end for questions. So if you've got a question, feel free to type it into the chat box to the right of your screen. Let's get started now with today's program. And hello again. I am Jason Reed, along with our producer, Karina Sinclair, who's right there. Hello. And coming along shortly will be my co-host, Cheryl Plouffe. Hey, Cheryl, how are you?
Good. I'm great. Thank you. It's exciting to be back. I've loved this series. We're going to just dive right in today into storytelling. And so I'm really excited about that. You guys?
That is my favorite topic. It's interesting because all three of us have worked together on storytelling. Like, we've done projects together. We've worked on scripts. And you guys know that I am just absolutely nuts about working on stories and getting them to be just right, add just the right drama with just the right characters. And I'm really pumped for today.
But so am I. I mean, it's so much fun to hear.
It's so close to all of our hearts, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So episode 3 of our Great Business Videos series is focusing on storytelling, but with a twist. Storytelling to sell. Creating engaging and effective stories that attract customers. So if you're in business, it's really important to know how to tell great stories, and that is going to be today's topic. So for those of you who are new to our Great Business Videos series, my name is Cheryl Plouffe. I'm a video marketing strategist. I have more than 25 years experience as a broadcaster, as a trainer, a college professor, and as a news director. Jason Reed is a professional speaker and speak to sell expert. He has more than 25 years as well of experience as a news writer, TV producer, storytelling trainer, and news director. And he's also the winner of 3 international awards for writing and story editing for network TV news. And Karina Sinclair is a freelance video producer, a manuscript editor. She has worked behind the scenes in television and documentary production since the age of 13. So if we were to combine all of our experience, we might end up with, who knows, it could be like a century's worth of experience. I'm not sure.
Pretty close.
It's a lot. It's a lot. But at Jason, Karina, and I actually come from a history of working together too. And so we are very passionate about stories. Jason, I'll let you take it over from here on the power of stories and just why they're so effective.
Yes. I mean, when you think about it, stories are the oldest form of communication. They obviously predate written language. People have been telling stories for a long time. And it's interesting because, as we've gotten into the 20th century and with advertising and with research, we realize now exactly how powerful stories are. And it's pretty amazing. So let me talk for a moment about the Jaws effect. And this, yes, indeed, involves the movie Jaws. So the summer that the movie Jaws came out, which I think was like 74, 75, the number of Americans swimming in the ocean drastically declined. Now, here's the interesting part. Before Jaws, swimming in the ocean had been seen as fun. Almost everybody did it, and it still was fun. But after the movie Jaws, many people refused to go in the water, even after experts showed them that their chance of dying in a shark attack was almost 0. And this is where it's even cooler, because in a survey that was done more than 25 years after the movie was released, almost half of the people who'd seen the movie were still afraid of swimming in the ocean. And this whole concept of stories, a well-told story being more powerful than logic, came to be known as the Jaws effect. And it really shows how powerfully our brains react to stories. Now, stories don't need to be based around sheer terror to work. And when you're trying to sell something, they probably shouldn't be. But in fact, with every power that we have over our fellow human beings, we want to use this power of story ethically. Right, Cheryl?
Absolutely. And there are really several different ways that we can use stories, and especially as it relates to business. So if you're in business, you're looking to grow an audience, you're looking to build connection with your audience so that they come to know, like, and trust you. We hear that all the time in marketing, right? So how to use stories? One way is to use it for that sense of connection with your audience so that they really can relate to you and that there's a rapport that's built between you and them. Another way to use stories as it relates specifically to business is really to illustrate a specific point. So if you're trying to make a point about something, then using a story in which to veil that point is really effective. It really helps to drive home the point that you're trying to make because it's under the guise of a story, and people love to hear stories. That's human nature. Overcoming objections is another way to use stories. And especially in business, part of what we do is to help people overcome objections or help them see why your product or service is going to help them reach their intended goal. So overcoming objections is something that we all need to do in our businesses, but using a story to help them see how they can overcome that particular objection is really effective. So those are 3 uses for stories as it relates to business.
So stories obviously are becoming used more and more in speaking and in business. And here is what I have noticed, particularly for solopreneurs, is sometimes stories are wonderful, but they don't let you know really what the point of the story is. And this is one of the very first things that you have to do when you're telling a story is figure out what exactly is your point. What exactly is the learning that you're trying to get across in the story? So I want you to start thinking of stories as a tool to help people learn, connect, overcome objections, but you really need to know what that point is first. Now, Cheryl, we should tell them about something that they can actually download and follow along with here. I have actually a signature storytelling tool that will cover some of the stuff that we're talking about today. And I believe, Cheryl, that it can be accessed actually on the webcast. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think Karina can bring it up under the offers tab. Karina, if you're able to do that. Under offers, there's a Jason storytelling tool is there and available for you to download. You don't have to opt in another time. It's literally just a download from that particular link. So I'm not sure if you can bring that up or if anyone's seeing that. Let me just go over actually to offers and see if I can do it myself.
Nope.
There it is. Perfect. Yeah. So it's signature storytelling tool, and it's a free download, and you can actually just click on that orange button and you'll be able to download Jason's storytelling tool for future use, or even to start using right now if you'd like to. So, Jason, I was just going to say one thing before we move on. We were talking about, do you guys still see the screen? I just want to make sure.
I'm seeing the slide.
You're seeing the slide?
Yes. Okay.
Okay, good. Yeah, you're seeing the what's your point slide. Good.
That's right.
I was just going to say a little point here before we move on to the learning is that when we talk about stories, when we talk about needing to determine, what the point of the story is and what the learning is, and it's using stories to tell one particular point, right? Rather than, trying to squeeze in like 5 different stories in one, especially as it relates to video. It's just really having to make 1 point per story or 1 point per video is really an effective way too, so that people don't get confused about what is the point of the actual thing. And it also keeps things shorter too.
That's a really good point, Cheryl, because, when you're speaking to a group, depending on the group and depending on how well your storytelling abilities are, sometimes you can tell a story for 5, 6, or 7 minutes. So obviously when we are telling a story on video, we want it to be a couple minutes or less. So Cheryl, why don't you go through the storytelling, the Storytell to Sell structure, the basics of it, and then I can come in and add a little bit of meat on the bones and give an example. And just to let people know, if you haven't downloaded the signature storytelling tool yet, it's okay, because everything that's in it we're actually going to cover on the slides here. So you can do that right after if you want to.
Yeah, and after, when we send out an email with all of the links to prior episodes. I'll include that in there as well. So the storytelling to sell structure is this. It starts with a setup. So we're going to show you here a series of slides with some imagery to really help drive home the point that Jason's making with his signature storytelling structure here. So it starts with the setup of the story itself. And as we progress through that, so again, you're going to set it up just as if you were, telling a story to a friend or whoever. What happens in this particular structure is that you set it up and then you introduce what the problem is. But notice how it starts to dip down. So now we have a problem that we've introduced. And at the bottom of that, oh, hang on a second. Let's just go up. There we go. At the bottom of the dip is where we really hit rock bottom. So the problem makes this particular story just take a complete nosedive. We're in a crossroads. We're at the very rock bottom of the particular story in question. Then we start to turn a corner and start to bring it some insight to the problem. Maybe it's, information, but we want to bring insight and maybe our experience and the story and the crux of the story itself to help overcome that particular problem. And then, I suppose we could call it somewhat of the denouement would be like the resolution of that particular story. So that's the story tell to sell structure as it starts from left to right. We have a setup, a problem, we hit rock bottom, we have insight, we introduce insight and the problem that we're overcoming, and then a resolution.
And this storytelling structure is something that you will probably be familiar with because it's obviously used in movies and novels and television shows. It is not the only storytelling structure, but it is the most common. It's interesting because I created this and I created the visualization with the dip, and then somebody sent me a video that novelist Kurt Vonnegut did a few years ago where he actually did the exact same dip and he talked about it in the exact same way. And his version was, he calls this story Man in a Hole. So
right. I love that.
So why don't I give people an example of how they would set this up? And I will use a more complicated than normal story because of one reason. One of the issues that a lot of people have is the fact that when they're telling a story, they want to tell absolutely everything, all the details. And people don't want to hear this story in real time, right?
Right.
I always say life is a series of random events, but your story shouldn't be. So let's take this example. This is a story I didn't use on video, but I used this in a talk. So it's a bit of a longer story. And I'll show you exactly how I use this structure to construct it. So I'll start out with this. So I used to tell this story when I was a general business coach. And I'll give you the basic version here, and I'll identify where I am in the story structure that we've just described. So I started thinking first, before I even told the story, about why I'm telling the story. So I wanted to connect with people who were ambitious and maybe facing challenges, because those were my potential clients. Secondly, I wanted to illustrate 4 insight points I was using in my talk. And as Cheryl said, when you're doing a video, you probably want to do 1, but I was trying to do 4 because it was a bit of a longer story. And those points were resilience, investment, clarity, and habits. So I knew that the key to the story was making sure those insights were clear. You've always got to figure out what is the insight first before you construct the story. So here's the story in a nutshell. It's a story about how I went from being sick, broken, unemployable to being an award-winning TV news director within a few short years. So the setup was this. Like many people in my mid to late 20s, I'd gotten married, I had a condo, I had a job. Although my job at the time was somewhat precarious because I'd graduated during a recession and I hadn't really broken out in my career yet. However, I was relatively comfortable. And Cheryl, if we could backtrack to the problem, because that will be the next thing. Okay, so problem hits here. So I've had Crohn's disease and arthritis since I was a kid. I've always dealt with pain and fatigue, but I've never really let it stop me. However, at 29, my health started sliding just a little bit more, and only this time it started to affect my attitude. So I started feeling bitter and upset, which made my health even worse and also made me difficult to deal with as a person. So finally, I hit rock bottom. Boom, right down there. A few months later, I lost my work, my wife, my condo, pretty much everything I had due to my mental and physical state. I was sick, broke, and unemployable. Low as you can go. However, I did have a few $1,000s left from the separation. Here's the problem. I thought I might never work again. And people kept telling me that I shouldn't spend any money. However, I knew deep down that I needed to get out of my funk and I needed to invest in myself. So I decided to spend all the money I had to go to Cambridge University in England for a summer term, which is something I always wanted to do. So here comes the insight. The investment was worth it. I was surrounded by other adult students who came from all over the world, and I learned from some of the world's greatest professors. By putting myself into this new and challenging situation, I was building my resilience and proving to myself I could bounce back. It also made me change my habits, so I started taking better care of myself. And finally, I was also inspired by the clarity of my ambitious classmates and decided I needed to get clear on what I wanted in my life, not just what I didn't want. So the resolution was this. As a result of adopting these 4 principles, resilience, investment, clarity, and habits, my life started changing dramatically for the better. As soon as I got back home, I was offered a new TV job, and less than 3 days later, I was promoted, my very first promotion ever, to a management position. And only a few years after that, I ended up in charge of an entire network TV newsroom. My life had changed drastically, from sick, broke, and unemployable to winning awards and respect from my peers, all because I followed a few simple but important principles.
Mm-hmm. Great story. I love that.
And
you know what, Jason, as you were just recounting that story, and I'm looking at the image of the structure here, I can't help but to think that how beneficial this tool is from the standpoint of helping with copywriting.
Oh, yeah.
It's really difficult. It's challenging for people to sit down at a computer and write their story. But, because from a copywriting standpoint, it's challenging to do that when you're looking at a blank screen. But when you have a structure like this, I think it would really help just from the copywriting standpoint, because you're doing them in sections, you're doing them in parts. And if you just follow this structure, I think it really can help from a copywriting standpoint.
Yeah, and the wonderful thing is, once you've got these down, like these are the most important points. And once you know what these points are, then if you have time, you can start adding more entertaining stuff to the story. You can start adding humor. You can start adding a bit more detail. And typically, the place where you want to add the most detail, if you can, is at that rock bottom part. People often don't really care how wonderful your life is afterwards. I mean, you want to give them that information, but if you want to really get into a scene with how you felt and how things looked to you or sounded to you, that rock bottom is like a really good place to talk about that.
That's interesting, because I would have guessed it would have been in the insight section, right?
Yeah.
Because in the insights, it's like, okay, well, I think most people would think, okay, well, in the insight section, that's where I'm going to be talking about, again, more maybe insights and information and that kind of thing and how I overcame it. But you're right. If you're looking at the rock bottom, that's really where the emotional stuff is lying.
Yeah. So think of the insight as being, fairly straightforward. You don't want to be too vague with your insight, right? But yeah, when we're talking about putting in detail, I'm thinking of like setting a scene. Like, for instance, I could have, talked about being in my room in front of this website for Cambridge University and feeling this pit in my stomach going, oh my God, this is all the money I have in the world, and that just brings people into that scene, and they can, sort of feel what that character is feeling. And that often brings power to the story.
I love it.
Now, there's another type of story called the tragedy. Some people have probably heard that term. It's not used nearly as much as our first type of story because, as tragedies go, they tend to end on a down note instead of an up note. But you can use them to speak to sell. So think of tragedies as more cautionary tales of things to avoid. So what you have, obviously, you want to set up the story again, and then the main character, things start going very well for them. Either they've gained something, or it looks like they're going to gain something. Maybe they're going to make a sale, and then boom, they make a bad decision. Something they say or do doesn't work, and suddenly, maybe they've lost the sale, and the result is things start to go south. They lose whatever they gained. And if we are really generous to our audience, we add a little extra thing on the end, and that is, figuring out what that insight and wisdom is. So here's what we'll do for an example for this. I actually did a 2-minute video a while ago using this tragedy structure to talk about a time where a story didn't go so well, when someone was using that to speak to sell. So Karina, when you're able to, if you could play that video, that would be awesome.
Here we go. This is such a great one. I love this video.
It's funny.
So let's talk about the dark side of storytelling and sales. Now, we've already talked about how powerful stories are as a tool of persuasion because they're an immersive experience. They're the original virtual reality. A well-told story draws people into it, which is great if you're trying to engage people. But the problem becomes, what happens when you tell a story that's traumatizing or off-putting or just too much information? So several years ago, I was shopping with some friends of mine who were building a house, and they were shopping for bathroom fixtures. And there was this big burly salesman, and he had helped them pick out a bath and a sink. And as we were walking around, my friend pointed to a bidet, and he said, "What's that?" And the salesman said, "Oh, that's a bidet. That would be very nice for your wife." And my friend said, "Well, but I don't understand. How do you use it? What sort of benefit is it to have one of these?" And the salesman, at this point, to his credit, decided to tell a story. But the story started like this. He said, "I used to work in the prison system, and it's very hot in the prisons, and I'm a big burly guy, and I used to sweat a lot." Now, at that point, I decided to walk away from the conversation because I kind of knew what was coming up next, and I didn't want to hear it. But my friends weren't so lucky. The next time I bumped into them, they were on their way out the store, and they were white as ghosts. They were totally traumatized by this guy's story. Now, he'd done a very good job in describing the potential benefits of a bidet, but he lost the customer because his story was off-putting. And as my friend's wife said as we left the store, she said, "I really didn't need to know that guy had on his head."
So there you have it.
Wow.
Hopefully that didn't traumatize too many people.
No. But
yeah, that's an example of a story that happened a long time ago, and my friends and I used to bring it up every once in a while and laugh at it. And then I started thinking, you know what? That's a really great example that I can give to people about how not to tell a story if it's traumatizing.
What not to do, yeah.
Yeah.
No, you know what, Jason? I really like these. Structures that you've put together here, because I think it really helps people to visual. I don't know. For me, I'm a visual learner, and I think a lot of people are visual learners, and that just have that cemented in my mind now. Anytime I want to tell a story, I'll be thinking about those two different structures. The man in the hole or tragedy, and looking at how I can really benefit. It could really benefit my copywriting and the structure of my stories. So really good. So it's time for Q&A. You guys, let us know if you have any questions in the chat box. Karina put a, what do you think? Could you tell a bidet story with a straight face? My answer to that is probably no.
I haven't told that story live yet, but I probably will sometime soon.
At some point.
So one thing I should mention here, it's a question I get asked often, is a lot of entrepreneurs are scared of telling stories about themselves because they feel it has to be some huge story about some traumatic life event. And that's not the case. I mean, you know, it can be that, but it can also be a much smaller story that simply illustrates the point you're trying to make. So let me give you an example of this. I had a client who was a virtual assistant, and she was a very private person, didn't really want to talk a lot about herself. But as I spoke to her, we actually came upon a narrative, something that happened to her that actually worked really well for her talk. And she was talking about how when she was 15 years old, she broke her right arm. But she's a very determined person, and she determined at that time she was going to continue doing all the things she did with two hands, even though she now had one arm in a sling. And guess what happened? She spent tons of time on all of these little tiny things like tying her shoes. She might spend an hour doing that. And a lot of the important things like studying got put by the wayside. Mm-hmm. So what she realized was asking help for the small little things really freed up a lot of time for her to concentrate on the things she needed to concentrate on. Mm-hmm. So then she flipped it. Right? Yeah. She said, like, for you entrepreneurs, sometimes you feel like you're working with a hand tied behind your back, and you may not realize that you need help. But sometimes getting help, doing those little things that take a lot of time, free you up so that you can do the big things and start making more money for your business. Yeah. And that was it.
And so it's not an earth-shattering story. It's something that's simple, and I think that's where you know, we're challenging you, you know, as a business owner to think about what are some, maybe what to you seem like insignificant stories, but they're not insignificant if it can help someone else to reach a goal or be inspired or motivated or whatever it is that you're looking to do to help your audience. But it doesn't have to be an earth-shattering story. It can be something really simple. And you're right, Jason. I think that, you know, a lot of people probably maybe hesitate to tell stories because they feel this is not an epic story. This is not an epic story, so I ought not to tell it. But it, in fact, can be really beneficial. Carrie writes, my worry is, do people really care about my story? This is a really good point, Carrie, because here's what they care about. They care about themselves. They care about moving the needle for themselves. And if your story can help them to do that, that's where the benefit is, and that's where they'll care. Agree, Jason?
Yes. So even when we're telling a story about ourselves, or sometimes especially when we're telling a story about ourselves, it's really about our audience, and we always have to keep that in mind. It's not necessarily about, well, what happened to me? It's what can my audience learn from this experience? Right. And as long as you have that, and again, which is why you want to start with, you know, what are the insights here? If you've got strong insights, if the audience feels like they're learning something, they will care about your story because the story will in effect be about them and what they can learn from it.
It also helps create that opportunity where, you know, you've experienced something in place of them. So now that other person doesn't have to have the exact same struggles as you had, but now they can have the benefit of your learnings from that struggle. So I think we can all put ourselves in somebody else's shoes and benefit from those opportunities, even if we don't know the person very well. We're just glad that it wasn't us in that story sometimes.
And I think that when it comes to, again, I'm coming from the standpoint of video, right? I think about videos, and when I'm working with clients to help them create videos that are of value to someone else, it's all about how much value can you put out into the marketplace. Well, if you can help someone in your ideal audience to move the needle, that's hugely valuable to them. And if we do it through story, which is more engaging, and it's how people really like to, you know, engage and build that connection, that's where you that's the sweet spot, right? So Carrie, you know, I'm thinking for you, like in fitness, for example, what are some things that you have, you know, what are some things that have happened to you that someone else could learn from, I think is ultimately what you want to do. And literally you could just get out a piece of paper and you brainstorm, get a nice cup of tea and relax and sit in a really quiet place where, you know, you can really let your creativity flow and literally write it down on a piece of paper, stories and different things that have happened to you. And then on the other side of the page, just write the lesson learned. And you'd be amazed at how many of those you can come up with.
And it really is, you know, storytelling really is a muscle. The more you use it, the more you think in terms of story, the more you're creating stories for yourself, the easier it's going to be to come up with stuff. Like one of the big questions is, well, you know, where do I get stories? Like I don't have any ideas. And the key is to just start doing them. Start thinking about what are things that I want to teach people? What are the important insight points that I have to share? And then start thinking back to, okay, have there been any instances in my life or in somebody that I know that shows through that story what that insight point is? And you do that enough times, and it actually gets to become really easy and really fun. What happens to me now if I'm doing a new talk and I need to illustrate another insight point is I just ask my subconscious mind, okay, I need a story about this. And I find within a day or two, something just pops up, you know?
Yeah, and it could be, for example, I'm just thinking in business, you know, some issues that come up are, you know, determination, commitment, things around efficiency, productivity, you know, so looking at, you know, what are some of the problems that we face as entrepreneurs, and then almost reverse engineering that and saying, what is a story? Like you said, you're asking your subconscious mind to come up with the story that helps us to, you know, flush out that particular issue. So no matter whether you go at it from left to right or right to left, the important thing is to just really sit down and think about stories. And your point, Jason, about it not being epic, it does not have to be the biggest story in the world. It can just be something really simple, but it can be just as effective.
I'd like to throw in that it's good to really be present in your life and to be aware of what you're encountering at any given point during the day. And that's where the stories are happening around you. It's not necessarily something that happened years and years ago. It could be things that are happening today in those encounters anytime you're interacting with other people or with your environment. So keeping in mind of what's happening today, what have I done in the past few hours where there's been something that I could take away and have learned from it. Keep those in mind, just being present in your daily life.
I find my best story ideas come when I'm either outside walking and I'm not thinking about anything in particular, or in the shower, or during those times that we all have during our day where, you know, we're not focusing on anything that's too complex and our creative mind can start to wander.
For sure.
Can I give you a real quick example? I actually keep notes like this on my phone. So I'm looking at my phone right now, and one of the things I wrote down was Brody and I were at Sobeys shopping for groceries one day, and in the aisle were, in the Pringles section, like where the chips are, they have a Pringles mystery box. So the Pringles mystery box is just that. It's a mystery. You buy the Pringles, and you have no idea what's inside, and so it's a contest and what have you. And we're going through the till, and of course we bought them. So we're going through the till, and I'm thinking, there's something here. You know, it could be relating that to the power of mystery and how it works in marketing. And maybe that relates somehow to business. I haven't told that story yet, but I made a note of it in my phone that it may become something in the future. So it's looking at things like you said, Karina, around you, things that happen to you in your day-to-day life, like shopping at Sobeys. You'd be amazed at what kind of story ideas can come to you.
And it's funny you mentioned that, because just a little while ago, I was out for a walk, and in my area, I noticed, you know, there are parts of the sidewalk that are kind of falling apart, and there's other parts that look pristine. And I found that some of the bits of the sidewalk that were falling apart, because they're all date stamped, some of them were relatively new. Some of them were in the past few years. And yet there were pieces of sidewalk from the 1950s that didn't have a crack in them. So, you know, as I'm noticing that, it's like, wow, this could turn into, if I need it, a really great story about quality and the importance of quality and the importance of things that last.
I think that, you know, Karina, Jason, and I, from having spent so many years in broadcasting as content creators, it maybe comes a little bit more naturally to us because we have been trained to recognize stories everywhere. And like you said, Jason, it's a muscle that needs to be worked, but can definitely be, it's definitely a skill set that entrepreneurs can gain from. Murney says, that's a great point, to be present. Absolutely. Yeah. So Well, we hope that you've enjoyed this discussion about storytelling and how we can create effective stories and really the power. I love the imagery there and thinking about those images and those structures the next time you want to tell a story that's effective for your audience. Now, episode 4, we have not determined the date on episode 4 yet, but we are going to, and we'll be sure to let you know right away as soon as we know what that is. But the next topic on our series of great business videos is tech tips. This is my wheelhouse. I love this stuff. Tech tips, how to make your business videos look great. That is going to be the next topic that we'll broach, and we hope that you'll join us live for that. Please take action on what you've learned today. We want you to go ahead and tell a story on video using the storytell to sell structure. A little bit of alliteration there.
That's easy for you to say.
To sell structure. And when you do so, use the hashtag #GreatBusinessVideos. You can email us the link to your video if you'd like, or tag us on social media because we may feature you on an upcoming show, and we'd love to see that. Otherwise, you can always contact us with questions you may have. We reply to all emails. You can contact Jason at powerstorymaster.com. Mine is Cheryl at cherylplouffe.com. And Karina can be reached at karina@linebylinestudio.com. Please be sure to share greatbusinessvideos.com with your network. We would love to have more people join us for this web series, and we really appreciate your time and your energy and your questions, and we can't wait to see you the next time. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope you have a fantastic day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.